I've been awakened several times by someone or something tapping on my shoulder. People of Reddit living in haunted houses, what have you experienced? My mom was touched when we were moving in. She was about to stand up into a wall hook, but something grabbed her head and pushed her back, which moved her away from what would have been a bad smack to the head. She thought it was my bro that did it, but when she turned around he was on the other side of the room, white as a sheet. Another thing that happened was the first night my mom left me and my brother alone in the house. I was nervous BC of it being haunted, so much so that I asked my brother if he could sleep in my room with me. He asked me for $20. I told him to off and grabbed my favorite doll to protect me. When I was in my room saying my prayers, my brother started screaming for me and I stopped to figure out what was wrong. He told me he heard someone pacing around his room, and the moment I opened the door it stopped. He then begged to sleep with me. I generously let him do that for free. All I have heard myself was knocking and the water turning on once or twice. Maybe a footstep once. My mother insists that the ghost likes to pace around my room in the dead of night, though when I'm out cold. What can I say? The ghosts have never bothered me. Also, ghost investigators came to our house last year and it's super mega haunted. I heard the recordings they took. One of them in my room claimed to be a god. The one in the barn defended Ben Franklin to the people in there that shot talked him. There are ghosts in the front room having sex. The one in my mom's room knows the Silence of the Lambs and told the investigators that he was bad. There were shadow children on the path behind my house. The house where I grew up was creepy, no ghosts, but something was off. There had been a few tragedies in our families. Then my sister's friend's mom just blurted out that there was an evil spirit there. Actually, a low vibration entity. Others made comments about the vibe in the house. I lived there alone after my parents died, and often felt like I needed to be quiet. A friend and I saw a broom move, odd sounds, someone knocking at the door in the middle of the night, dogs growling at something behind me, and I came up the basement stairs. I had a Tino friend come in and smudge the whole place with sage and copal. It changed everything. House calm, peaceful, and orderly, and I stopped feeling like I needed to tiptoe around. I've been awakened several times by someone or something tapping on my shoulder. Real enough so that I thought it was my wife and answered, "What?" I'm sure it's just a muscle spasm or something, but it's creepy as hell. My dogs also stare at the top of the stairs like someone is there. Also, creepy. My parents' house is haunted. The family who lived there before we were super crazy people. The husband was abusive and pretty much all the kids were in trouble with the law. They had a ton of cats and other various animals in the backyard. While doing various repairs on the house we found notes in the walls. One of them said, "He hit me and that's okay." One day the husband just up and leaves, then kids leave and the wife dies alone in the house. She died in my room. We found out when we replaced my carpet. A 6-foot long by 2-foot wide piece of flooring was removed and replaced. I never knew what had happened to her until just recently. The things I've experienced were whispering noises in the corners of the walls, cold hands touching my shoulders, things being knocked down off the walls, and feeling like somebody is standing next to me or peering over my shoulder. I'm glad I don't live there anymore. The ghost steals things, mostly, and no, not just misplaced, but gone. It took my phone once, and a recipe my mom had put on the counter. I got my phone back, but the recipe has never reappeared. It also likes to turn things over. I have a shelf of little figurines in my room, and every so often I'll find one neatly turned upside down. We hear noises now and then. Voices in another room, footsteps, keys jingling. A friend of mine came over once to take care of our cat while we were traveling, and the ghost acted up the entire time she was there. She says she heard someone running up and down the hall all night, and laughter coming from the other end of the house. Shadow man. Woken up in the middle of the night to find a man standing over my bed. Ceiling fan turning off and on. TV channels changing. The door gently closing on its own. A reflection of someone walking behind me when I was home alone. This was a while ago, and seems implausible, but I had a cousin who passed away really young. Afterward, a picture of him on a TV stand my aunt had would always fall over randomly. Happened a few times when we were just sitting around. We just moved out of a house that, I don't know about haunted, but definitely had some bad juju. It was then a friend mentioned salting the house. Basically, you pour a bunch of salt into a plate, walk around the house, corners, closets, Everything high and low with a plate of salt. After that's done, you pour it into a mason jar, seal it tight and bury it in your backyard. One spare room in my ex's house. Although I cannot confirm it was haunted, his entire, and extended, family seemed to think so. A few of his friends/family visiting claimed they could not get a good sleep in that room. It was always chilly in there. The door leading to the pool area would be slightly opened even though we swore it had been locked. Although I don't know if this is due to paranormal activity when at that room, our phones would also play up. I used to live above a 200-plus-year-old tavern that used to be used as a brothel. I lived on the uppermost floor and things used to happen pretty frequently. Once or twice I was woken up by the sound of a dog running around my apartment or scratching at my bed, but I didn't have a dog. I heard a voice tell me to be careful once while I was there, and whenever people found out I lived up there, they would tell me their personal ghost story from the bar. The bartenders sometimes would see apparitions on the ground floor, and once one of them heard loud booming sounds that sounded like someone was trying to hit the door in with a sledgehammer. As for the oddest thing that happened, I had originally stated out loud when I moved in that the day I see a ghost is the day I move out. Ironically, the day I moved out, I was in the stairwell, which was reported to be haunted by lots of mediums, and I was sitting on the upper stairs looking at the second floor landing when I saw two apparitions manifest together, looking up at me. I was so shocked. My mom told me that they had probably come to see me off and to say goodbye. I currently live in a not haunted at all house and me kind of miss having them around. I don't any longer, but I lived in a haunted house all through my childhood/high school. It was an older house built in the late 19th century for a planned mill town. The original owners, the factory doctor and his family, lost twin girls, one to polio and one to exposure. A lot of the stuff, the creaking, the flickering lights, the cold spots, could definitely be totally explained by it being a century old. The other stuff? My brother and I would often hear loud voices. We would go see what mom wanted, only to find no one home. There was a half bath with a lock on the outside of the door, and that door was prone to either close audibly when the family was in another room, or more distressingly stick closed completely if you used that bathroom when you were alone in the house, which by the time my parents eventually moved after my brother graduated, the just don't use that bathroom when you're alone in the house was an unspoken rule. It would only stick if you were alone. Small things would often go missing and then be found in odd places, the fridge, the basement, the half bath. It was a weird place. A lot of eerie stuff. I lived in a house with a poltergeist for around 15 years. The house was Victorian and the poltergeist just used to steal things and then put them back in odd places weeks later. We often found my dad's and my glasses in funny places in the morning after we'd put them on the bedside table at night, like the cat's food bowl or, once, in the garden. My A-level Latin set textbook of the Aeneid went missing for 2 weeks before turning up in the fridge, a month before my exam as well. That one was irritating. A coffee table once moved from the downstairs living room to the living room upstairs overnight. We found a plant from the garden dumped on our dining room table once, roots and soil and all. We set up cameras for a few months at one point after I found my glasses in the garden because we thought maybe one of us was sleepwalking or the cat was stealing things, but no sleepwalking, no kleptomaniac cat and no floating objects or anything either. It was like stuff would dematerialize and rematerialize somewhere else. I grew up in a haunted house from the age of 8 to the age of 20. I saw my first and the last ghost within a month being there. We all, family, experienced things being taken and returned a long time later in the oddest places, hearing voices in nearby rooms, hearing objects crashing loudly only to find nothing there, beds being lifted and then dropped while you're in it. The worst feeling, however, was when I moved out. I moved into an apartment and the atmosphere was so different. It felt closed and safe while the house felt open and like anything could happen. Like someone was constantly watching you. Last Christmas I stayed the night alone in the house. My mom had to work that night and my niece and nephews went home. The kids had left this little RC car in the living room. Sometime between midnight and 4 a.m. this car starts moving around. I figure the remote's being pushed down somewhere by another toy. It happens quite a few more times before I just turn the car off. The next day I find out that the kids took the remote home but accidentally left the car. All that's around the house are businesses, so I doubt any other child nearby was playing with their toy in the middle of the night. Modern house, but built on top of old Victorian houses, the basements and foundations are still a couple of feet underground. We come across them when digging in the garden. We've had the usual footsteps, toys and lights turning themselves on and off, doors slamming, but two things in the last 6 months have really freaked us out. My wife saw a man walking in the garden. She is a fairly collected person normally but was freaking out that there was a guy in the garden. I immediately went out to see, and as I thought, all the gates were locked. I checked the CCTV and there was nothing, just me going out to check. She was absolutely positive that she'd seen a guy, around 6 feet tall, walk past the kitchen window. We had new windows fitted, and we have vertical blinds at all the windows. We'd taken them down for the windows to be replaced and not put them back up yet. One morning I was getting dressed and remember seeing the bedroom blind on the floor. I went to work and got a phone call 3 hours later from my dad. He had gone round to the house to fit the blinds and was complaining about how badly the blind in our bedroom had been put up. "It looks like you've thrown it up," he said. I had to explain that I'd not put it up and that it was still on the floor that morning. Nobody had access to the house in the meantime, so how in the world had it been put up? Still confuses the hell out of me to this day. Worth pointing out that this has all happened since we started having some building work done over the old basements. About a year ago I lived in an upper apartment, house built in 1900, the previous tenant died of a heart attack a month before moving in. One night I was woken up out of a dead sleep by the bedroom door opening up. The doors and door handles were all original, skeleton key types. Very loud and creaky. My boyfriend comes down the hall from the living room, asking if I'm awake and if I open the door. Still, in bed I respond, saying no, confused but I knew what happened. Another occurrence was when my boyfriend and I woke up at the same time, around 3 a.m. to find that our watches and every other clock was 15 minutes slow. They all stopped at the same time. All of the watches I owned when I lived there stopped working. Alarm clocks that ran on batteries seemed to keep the wrong time. Phone times were obviously still on time, that's how we knew things were off. I would also come home to things being moved. Stuff would always be out of place. We lived in one all throughout my teen years. From the first night we moved in, there were heavy footsteps down the hall followed by a loud boom. My dad first dismissed it as the furnace, but it would happen during the summer as well. Our dog uses to bark and growl at the back empty bedroom. The same room used to sometimes suddenly emit a strange scent that smelled of freshly dug earth. My mom had witnessed a lampshade wobbling and heard the piano open and close, and one afternoon, we all witnessed a cup of tea suddenly travel across an ottoman and crash to the floor. Mostly poltergeist stuff and missing items showing up in the weirdest places. My mom had sensed that the kid who stayed in the back room before, was practicing witchcraft. She was intuitive that way. We got used to it and learned to live with it. I live in a house in a suburb where a lot of bad stuff went down during World War II. People in the area told us the house was haunted, but it came with my job so we had to move in. The previous family who moved in swore to us that they had had some experiences, but we haven't heard anything since we moved in 9 months ago. But we hosted a party last week and things started happening in the next 2 nights. My wife and I got woken by footsteps running along the wooden floors at about 2 a.m. We checked to see if it was our daughter, but nope, she was fast asleep. And this running sound was so loud on the floorboards, it had woken us up at the same time. I drifted off to sleep again, and my wife got woken by the front door closing shut. I slept through this one. Later, all of the lights in the kitchen came on by themselves. The next night we were woken by the lounge room lights turning on by themselves, and then we heard dragging noises coming from the back wing of the house. Needless to say, we didn't get to sleep until 5 a.m. that morning. A friend came over to drop something off to my wife and she appeared quite reticent to be in the house. Her husband told me at work the next day that she felt like there was something oppressive in our house when she came around, and we had told her nothing about what was going on. Hopefully, that's it for the time being. We've heard nothing since, so we can only assume the ghosts don't like us hosting functions. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.